Welcome to Booking It. Today's episode will be Theogony Part 1. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Booking It. I'm, of course, your eloquent host, Cooper Cobbs, and joining me today are three very fine fellows. First, over there, sitting across from me, Mr. Isaiah Mariatsky. How you doing, sir?
What's up?
And over there, next to Isaiah, basically back turned to him because he doesn't like Isaiah's. No, I'm kidding. It's Tanner Lewis.
Wrong.
Howdy, folks.
And joining us today is our very special person. No, a very special person. No, our very... all of the above.
Cooper messed it up, guys.
Our very new panelist, Mr. Bryson.
Why, hello. Thanks for inviting me here.
Of course, of course. So right now we are recording inside of our classroom where we're doing co-op together, and it's our first one that we're doing here. It's a lot of fun. Bryson is our new classmate, but we've all known him beforehand. He's a great guy. Tell us about yourself, Bryson. What should the people know out there?
Well, I come from a very different place, a far-off, distant land.
Oh, okay.
Mainly just the country. I love reading books, so I'm glad y'all are letting me take part in this podcast because every moment I have a free time is spent reading books, and so
Great.
Glad to be here and doing that.
Yeah. Well, one other thing that recording all in the same place gives us a chance to do is to sing together.
What?
We do it online. It's all weird. But last week when you guys weren't here, Tanner and I were doing like a duet to A Whole New World.
Y'all got
Weren't we
issues.
doing that, Tanner?
Y'all got issues.
Come on, Tanner.
Hey, it was pretty good.
It was pretty good.
It was pretty good.
It was pretty good. So that might make an appearance
I
at some point. But
I attempted harmony, but it didn't work.
we almost did it. We almost did. Okay. Well, Tanner is the designated leader this week for our exposition strand during class. So, Tanner, take it away.
Well, guys, I'm your humble and eloquent host, Tanner Lewis. And, today we're going through Theogony. And you might ask yourself, why are we going through one of the most pagan, anti-Christ books ever?
It's a good question.
It is a really good question. Why should we... So, guys, why do you think that it's even, important that we should be studying literature like this?
Well, first, why don't we understand, why we wouldn't? What is this book?
What is
It's
this
a
book?
messed up book about how the Greek gods became, where they came from.
Yeah.
It's messed
Which is a lot of, polygamy.
Polygamy.
Lots of it going on.
up. Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Sleeping with your children, sleeping with
Relatives, yeah.
and
A lot of people.
everybody.
Anyway, I'll just say,
Essentially, yeah.
so we are right now reading, Theogony. We're going to read, the Iliad and the Odyssey, other books later on. We also have the study guide that we're reading called Heroes of the City of Man. And so it makes kind of a couple of arguments introduction for why Christians should study and read the pagans. So first and foremost, we have to understand that anything that we can gain must be through the Christian worldview, because otherwise we don't know what to decipher, right? And so when we apply that worldview, we can see parts of God's story playing out. Now, obviously, we're going to have to chew and spit. Not everything is part of God's story. But when we apply that worldview, we can see certain things. So, he gives an example of, Shakespeare. When Shakespeare uses imagery like serpent imagery or wedding or feast imagery, then we can see, he is clearly saying something that rings true, and we as Christians know that's true because of the Bible. And so we can see that theme that God has in Scripture and in real life play out through the story. Now, in the Odyssey and the Iliad and even Theogony, we can learn the same kind of things. We can see God's general story play out, even if it's in a pagan way, and still get truths from it and chew and spit the bad stuff. Now, obviously, there's a line. We can't just, watch something or read something that's really bad and be like, oh, there's some truth hidden here. And that argument has been used by so many people and it's not good. But I think that the Greeks are not past the line. Number one, because they're super influential. Even today, our world is influenced by the Greeks and what they believe, and they're very famous. And even, Apostle Paul quoted from Greek poets at certain points. And also because it's not it doesn't cross the line in terms of content, and they're super influential. And I think that they stood the test of time, and they do have something that we can learn from them. So that's kind of what I would say. And there's more to be said.
Yeah, and we can better understand our world and the world we live in.
Yeah.
Through understanding their world.
it's like I heard it said one time, like we can read these myths as like, you know, the army studies the Nazis at West Point, because it's like yeah, we can study our world, we can learn the good things and also the bad things about how people worshipped probably demons. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Bad things.
Oh. Isaiah's just over there brooding in his corner.
Why do I have to read this?
Okay, so I guess the most important thing is, what is a theogony? You know, like, what is that?
Yeah, I mean,
Anyone?
well,
That is a very good question that I don't know the answer.
wait, so wait, is you can have a theogony, not just the theogony?
Here's where the City of Man asks you, what is a theogony, Cooper?
Okay.
So that's
I assume it's just like a story that like tells the beginning of something, or like the origin of
kind of like a genealogy type
yeah.
thing.
I mean, but since Theo's in there, it's got to be about the gods, I guess. So
Yeah.
The origin of the gods.
Possibly. Yeah.
It's a possible answer.
Yeah, and the world itself. So world and gods.
Yeah. The origin of things, kind of like a Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
A pagan
Yeah,
Genesis.
exactly.
A pagan
One
Genesis.
might
Very
say.
pagan Genesis.
One might say.
One might say.
That is the definition of it, yes.
Okay.
I just looked it up.
Okay.
Hey,
Wow,
Isaiah
cheating.
Isaiah
He's the only one who's got a
confirms
computer open in
through
front of him, so.
Isaiah confirms through Google.
Yes.
Anyways, what are like the main themes that you've picked up from our reading of theogony up until this point so far?
Like the themes the author wants to get across, or like things
Or
that we can take.
What are the themes that you have just in reading it? First impressions.
First impressions.
Whoever
Why
believed
would
this has
anyone
issues.
come up with this? It makes no sense.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That
I
is
mean,
my
it
first
makes you
thought.
appreciate Genesis.
Yes,
Yeah, it's like
yes.
this
Much
is,
less
this is
violent
beautiful.
beginning.
God says this was good, and I believe him. I don't see that here.
Yeah, just comparing those two different worldviews and two different beginnings, we can see, like, why on earth would someone want to follow these things that just are completely an abomination, just like destroy your whole way of living? And yeah, then you go back to Genesis and you have this beautiful creation of heaven and earth and all spoken by the breath of God. And you just see, like, where was the distinction? Why did people just forsake this perfect story for something that was completely terrible?
Yeah, I think we'll get into that next time a little bit, like how much of Genesis was he explicitly ripping off, or things like that, or how much of history was he ripping off. And there's one thing I want to say, it's about physics and about like the worldview of the Greeks, because the worldview of the Greeks was that these gods were controlling nature. They were very violent and very volatile, and so their study of science didn't really progress that far, because they didn't expect to find laws or order. They expected to find chaos, and that their Genesis, their theogony, represents that. Like, it's just
Literally one of the first
chaos.
gods
Yeah,
being
literally
born
the
is
origin
chaos.
is chasm chaos, that guy, yeah. And so from there, it's easy to see how the worldview descends. And us, it's not very appealing. But I think we should understand, like, what is appealing about this worldview, you know? Like, I mean, this was written, theogony was written, like, what, 800, 700 BC or something like that? And it was, like, the Greeks existed for several hundred years later. So, like, a huge culture that was very influential upon the whole world, like, worship this. And so I'm not saying it is appealing, because obviously as Christians, we've tasted the real thing. We have tasted it and seen the Lord is good, and Genesis is beautiful, and our origin is beautiful. And this is not. But it does, like, contrast, like you said, Bryson, the worldviews and of Christianity and of the pagan Greeks. So.
Yep, for sure. So when it opens up and Hesiod is like, you know, guys, I was a shepherd once. And I was sitting.
I was a young shepherd lad.
You know, I was my own version of the Disney Hercules, and I was sitting on my little side of the mountain, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the 9 muses appeared to me and gave me divine revelation. What do we think about this, guys? Like, is this...
Who is to believe this? Like, believe me, guys. I heard these random.
Hesiod was definitely one of those shepherd guys who was not getting the ladies. You know, I swear the muses spoke to me. I swear.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, just walking into the local village. You know, guys, the nine gods of goddesses of just all of the arts appeared to me and said, "You have been given the gift of art."
And well, apparently, like, I mean, he became pretty popular, so it worked. Whatever he saw, you know. Oh, that's one of the things. Like, did Hesiod, like, see demons that gave him this? Did he, like, see something, or did he just, like, make it up on his own?
Yeah, because that's what some of the people were saying is, or at least the authorities on this issue that study it, they've said, okay, do we believe what Hesiod said, or did he just make this all up and then
Right.
Bada bing, bada boom. All of the gods now come from
Yeah.
Hesiod's description of it. And part of me wonders, because he says he got it from 9 muses who are like famous for singing and dancing and doing all of their sort of happiness
Carousing.
stuff. Was Hesiod singing and dancing when he was speaking this poetry every time?
What mushrooms do they have on this mountain? Is
I
that what
know.
you were saying?
Yeah.
Well, I want to
Messed up.
say, like, even the introduction to this book, like, asks that question. Like, this is not, as far as I'm aware, someone who has a Christian worldview who was translating that, but his introduction is like, did he see these things? Like, I think we have to ask that reasonable question when this thing caught on, and like you said, it became like the myth.
Mm-hmm.
Like, did he just make it up? He was really good at making stuff up, or did you see something? What do you think, Isaiah? What's your opinion?
The guy was on drugs. Yeah, it's messed up, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, not to get too far in the weeds, but you've heard of people who've had they've tried psychedelics and they've probably seen demons, like what I would describe
Probably.
as a demon. Like,
Hey, it's Alice in Wonderland. He's sitting on a mushroom, smoking his hookah.
yeah, the
Yeah.
caterpillar guy.
Yeah.
that was yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, what's the original question even?
I don't even know.
We were talking about. We were just discussing
the muses,
the idea
yeah,
of like, what do we think about Hesiod's claims?
Oh yeah. Well, what's
It's
interesting is when we read Paradise Lost, Milton opens up with like appealing to basically angels, like the angels or the muses, the heavenly muse that like inspired Moses, right, or something like that. So it's interesting to see like the Christianized version of that. But otherwise, Hesiod did not see what he said he saw, right? Can we agree? Like,
Yes,
he
for
did
sure.
not see
Probably
the
not.
9 muses. Yeah, whatever they were, they may have been acting like that, but they were not. So
Yeah.
So does the man set himself up as a worthy witness? Is he trustworthy?
not according to us. Yeah.
No.
I mean, I think it's possible he saw demons, but I don't know. He could also just been high on something. Like,
Yeah.
So I guess the question is not like, is the book trustworthy, or more of do we think that Hesiod believed what he was saying?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that eventually, I don't know if he started this. I have to research it. But like, the Iliad and the Odyssey both open up with like appeals to the goddesses and the muses, right? And so it's like it became tradition. Maybe it was already a tradition at his point. And so it may not have even like, I bet you, okay, if I'm being honest, I made a joke about him, getting the ladies or whatever. But I bet you it was just the thing. Like, if you're telling a story, you come up with this myth, or even history, you said you heard the goddesses or you appealed to them. So it could just be like a self-contained thing of he didn't see them, but he was coming up with this, or he was drawing on the lore and developing it more. And so he just kind of added his own thing, and that became the tradition. So that's possibly could be what happened. I think that's a fair interpretation of it as well. So he couldn't have even like believe that he saw anything, but he just put it down as part of the telling of the story.
Yeah, if he didn't really believe it, he sure went pretty far in depth on everything. So he kind of sold it to himself in the end, I think.
Yeah, they're irrelevant in the end. You're right. Yeah.
Okay, so like, who are the muses? Like, what's their role in his kind of fabrication, or like his story that he's telling?
Well, in the beginning, they're the first ones that give him the power to be able to speak these myths and be able to speak with eloquence, I think.
Yeah. I'll neither confirm nor deny that I appealed.
Cooper appeals to the muses before he
No,
turns on
that's
his
not
mic,
true,
guys.
that's not true.
Ew.
Oh, muses of podcasting. That me.
Grant me eloquence and humbleness.
Well, I know, and
So
it just
speak.
through all of this, it really, reading it amazes me how many gods they could appeal to. Like, they could appeal to the god of the harvest. They could appeal to the god of singing and dancing. They could appeal to the god of this and that.
There's always someone to curse when something went wrong. Always something to bless.
Yes.
Yes.
And that kind of reminds me of, where's the responsibility in this Greek culture? Is there no responsibility going on? Because they're always wanting to blame it on some god, or wanting to I don't know if they really can ever merit anything either, because it's all the gods that are giving it to them, or it's all the gods that are taking away from them. It's always the god's fault. It's never their fault. And I never really thought about that before, but there are so many different gods that they created for this and that, and just, it really seems like they're kind of trying to shirk responsibility.
Well, I mean, okay. In the Bible, I think it's Job. He says, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. I think that we have to be careful too to distance that from God's sovereignty and saying, you know, God permits all things to happen, allows all things to happen. All things happen in accordance with his will. And so at a certain point, you have to be like, okay, God is in his sovereignty allowing these things to happen, permitting it, and in some sense controlling these things. But also I have responsibility to make choices and to be responsible. So I hear what you're saying, but I think we got to distance that conception, which I think is true, from the biblical conception of God's sovereignty as well.
I 100% agree.
Yeah.
So in this Heroes of the City of Man book that we're reading, he kind of talked about the idea of trickery and trickery in art and kind of not outright lying in a sense, but a twist of truth, you know? What do you think about that? Like, what do you think about, like...
In theogony?
In theogony and in other literature, like poetry, and in the comparison of not exactly straw man, but still in the same sense. Like, you'll take something out of proportion in order to display its beauty or its awesomeness, and you'll kind of, in a sense, like, lie about it. What do you think about that? In the context of theogony. Isaiah, I'm looking at you. You haven't spoken.
How can you look at him?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I talked about earlier, like, we can read the Greek myths because even though they twist the truth, we can still see a little bit of it in there. And then for other reasons, we can read it. But like Tanner was saying, in the context of theogony, like, what truth kind of was there? Did it twist? How did it twist it? Is that, like, you know, and analyze that kind of thing.
And how do we use that, like, in our everyday lives as well?
How do we apply theogony?
I don't know about the applying part.
Not necessarily the applying, but just like, you know, when we're writing poetry or me and Cooper are writing our short stories, right? We'll put things out of context.
Isaiah's never written poetry.
Poetry.
You wrote some poetry, Isaiah.
I wrote one poem and then quit last year. One.
I'm trying to make something
to be
apply
clear,
to you.
God wrote most of the Bible in poetry. I'm just saying. Like,
I'm fine reading it. I don't like writing it.
Okay.
Okay.
Just blowing things out of proportion. What do you think?
I mean, I think the part that you were saying with the whole, like, you can kind of see a little bit of the truth, and it's just with the whole creation, how, if I remember correctly, it was like in phases or like steps to it or something.
Generations, something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. Like, there were phases to it, same as there were days in the Bible.
Right.
I mean, you could also see that by just like reading the Bible instead of reading this messed up, full book of
I'm gonna
a
be
bunch
honest.
of orgies
I
and
think,
stuff.
Yeah. Like the Iliad and the Odyssey, I think we'll be able to see, like, that they're better.
Yeah.
But it also helps us see the difference between truth and falsity, between beauty and just complete
Absolutely. Yeah.
trash. And like in here, when the muses first appear to Hesiod, it says that they say to him, "Shepherds that camp in the wild, disgraces, merest bellies. We know to tell many lies that sound like truth, but we know to sing reality when we will." So they, even right there, they confess, we're going to sing lies that sound like truth.
Right.
How often does that happen, that the person lying is like, okay, I'm about to lie, now take it with a grain of salt?
Well, I love that it happens in stories too. So we watched Braveheart a couple weeks ago, Caroline and I and my dad. And my dad, his hand on the remote, so don't be like, oh my goodness, Cooper saw Braveheart, what the heck? Anyway, but in the very beginning, like, he opens up, Robert the Bruce is narrating, right, and he says, historians in England will say I am a liar, but history is written by men who have hanged heroes, right? And that's a meta commentary because Braveheart is supposed to be like one of the least historically accurate movies, like, in recent memory. So it's funny to see, like, people like meta commentating on their own work sometimes. Like Peter Jackson does this in The Hobbit. Like the very first movie, he says all good stories deserve embellishment, and what does he go on to do? Well,
he embellishes with vigor.
Ruins the whole thing.
And not well.
No.
Okay, one other thing I was going to say is kind of, somebody talked about, like, the structure of the story. I think, Isaiah, you mentioned, like, the structure of it, and that reminded me of Genesis, like you said, the 6 days. And I was reading something the other day that was talking about, like, we're not going to solve, the old earth, young earth days, whatever. But what was interesting was that God is clearly doing something in telling us that the world was made in 6 days in Genesis, right? And so that's number one, establishing the week. 6 days shall man work, and the seventh shall rest. That order. Is also establishing, interestingly, someone I listened to was saying that basically God was trying to establish, like, a temple form of like in order the construction of the days. So you have the 6 days and the manner in which they're constructed, they're parallel, and then the image of God is the last thing that is made, and that kind of represents the temple. And on the seventh day, God rests. So it's kind of this orderly structure. God is establishing the week, establishing temple worship, and at the same time, it's providing us with this beautiful narrative. And so, yeah, like Isaiah was saying, the structure is all messed up, but it's kind of it's there, but it's messed up. So.
Yeah. I would not recommend reading.
Yeah, unless you have to read for school, don't worry about it. Yeah. I think that we only have to read this to just kind of establish for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like, okay, we understand kind of what's going on with the Iliad and the Odyssey, just not Percy Jacksonized kind of thing. you
Yeah,
Mhm,
like
that's fair.
Did you ever read Percy Jackson, Bryson?
No, I've never read
Okay,
it.
well, good for you.
Not
But you said,
missing out on
you said to
anything?
read Theogony instead. So.
Yeah.
Your understanding of Greek literature and history will be much better than
Yeah,
all
it's
of
not
ours.
tainted.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah,
tinted.
Percy Jackson
Mhm.
was bleh.
Not that I remember any of it, but yes.
Right.
I know, right? Anyways, like, how does this like nature of lying, apply to our understanding of art?
So I was listening
First
to
poetry,
something.
then art. What the heck?
It is art. Yes, poetry is art.
No, I said
Isaiah,
first poetry,
Is
then
this
art.
Oh,
art?
Gotcha.
Isaiah, you are art, therefore.
That doesn't mean I have to
Your
like
story is
art.
being written
What?
by God.
Your poetry in his hand.
Okay, what I was gonna say, I was listening a couple weeks ago to podcasts talking about documentaries. Now documentaries can lie to you, just like the way that they cut, the way they tell the story, and the way they favor like one side or the other. Like Tanner was telling me, I don't know why he did this. He watched like the Netflix documentary about the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trials, and I'm sure that if you watch that, you can see they are favoring one person in the way they're cutting and the clips that they're showing, things like that. So you can easily lie in art and make it appear that you're not. So it's all. I mean, most art is just tricks of hand and sleight of hand, demonstrating the kind of the thing that you want to show the audience, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how much of it is actually going to be? We've been reading multiple times for multiple days a quote by C.S. Lewis talking about originality.
Yeah.
How much of that is actually going to be art that they came up with? Hardly any of it is. And reading from Theogony, we can also see that it is based off of other stories. There are other stories, like Isaiah was saying. Almost all great stories pull something from the Bible.
Mhm.
The Bible is the greatest story,
Right.
so it is going to be copied like no other book has before.
Mhm.
So art is going to be copying. It is going to be a constant copying.
Constant source for. Other
Yes,
things.
yes. You're never going to be able to get rid of it because it's always going to influence.
Right, and sometimes you don't even have to try. Like, I'm not going to like copy this biblical theme, but I'm telling something that is true, and therefore, since the Bible is the source
It
of truth, it
reflects.
reflects. Yeah.
How does Hesiod connect poetry and the political rhetoric of the time? This is kind of a complex, multifaceted question.
Well,
Essentially,
Go ahead.
he's just asking for the listeners, like, how is the way that Hesiod is writing this? How is it connecting to the political views of the time?
Okay. By the way, for the people listening, it's lunchtime, so you might hear people like running around outside the room.
Yeah.
So anyway, go ahead.
Anyways,
Okay. Well, why don't you establish like what are you referring to when you, like talk about political rhetoric?
essentially, talking about the idea of the political status of the time in ancient Greece, right? And how all of their city-states that they're currently living in are kind of based around their ideas of the gods. I mean, some of the seven ancient wonders of the ancient world are
temples.
temples that are stuff.
Colossus of Rhodes kind of
Colossus
thing,
of Rhodes, just temples and statues of these deities that Hesiod is writing about in
By the way,
his
is it
theogony.
Hesiod or Hesed?
I've heard-
Hesiod.
I've heard it
Oh,
as
boy.
both. I've heard it as both, so I'm just going with whatever feels right at
Maybe
the
we
moment.
come back next time when we have
Yeah. We clarify next time.
yes.
Bryson's going to come back with
Okay. To answer your question,
come back with it.
To answer your question, I think everything goes back to worldview. I mean, you have, like I said, you have the temples where they're establishing worship, and I'm sure that like Hercules and Odysseus and Achilles, like those are the models of this culture. And so the people who are going to be leading or inspiring are people who are either A, like devoted to worshiping the pagan deities, or B, reflect some nature of the ideal of the time. And so you're going to have Achilles, you're going to have the Odysseus, you're going to have the schemers, the strong men, the priests, those kind of people are going to have huge sway in the culture, especially if they seem to be shown favor by the gods. So that's what I would see.
Okay, how do you think that might connect to what happens nowadays with art and literature and anything down to what we watch and listen to?
Yeah, well, I think that's really interesting. Kind of not really answering that question, but going back to the political structure, our political structure is not really the people in politics now aren't really as into art and poetry and stuff like that
Right.
as these people were back in poetry in theogony and in the Greek culture. So many of those politicians, the way that they convinced people that they were right and that their plans should be put into action were through poetry and through
Actual rhetoric.
yeah, well, that too.
Not just
Somehow we don't have much of that these days.
Bernie Sanders is like,
If you're just enough of a victim.
yeah, that's right.
But yeah, so just and then could you repeat your
There's
question?
one thing I want to say though about like modern day art and stuff like that.
Yes.
Well, right now in Hollywood, the muses aren't speaking because the writers are on strike. We all know that's the real reason, right?
Yeah.
Essentially, my question was, how is this idea of like being correct and being on the idols of the day, talking about the idols like Odysseus and wrote
cultural idols.
the cultural idols, yeah, these heroes, quote unquote, that are like prevalent. Like Hesiod probably gained popularity because of his theogony, because he was on, he was on point, right?
Yeah,
he-
it's a fire poem back in his day.
Exactly.
Isaiah
Exactly.
would say otherwise. But
I mean, he gained credibility. He was like shown to be a part of this kind of like movement that's happening throughout all of Greece. How does that apply to modern day, the world now? Like, how does the media use this?
well, I mean, I think it's everything's just shifted. I mean, basically anything that's non-Christian is just we can call pagan because it is. So there's just different forms of worshiping pagan. Like nowadays people worship science and materialism instead of pagan deities or whatever. But I mean, in our culture, like we have the type of person who is worshipped, and it's a little different. It's the social media influencer, I guess, who's beautiful or has all the followers or whatever. And it's kind of just fame oriented. But that person kind of becomes a leader, I guess. So it's like different. It's not the strong man or the schemer. It's just so that our version of it is just shifted. If it's no less toxic and no less unwholesome, one might say.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's really interesting comparing the founders or the people that were supposed to be in charge of their political system, or in this case, these gods that were supposed to be worshipped above all others, and that they prayed to for each of these, for really anything in their life that they needed to happen. Instead, we as Americans, we have a much different history where we have men who took action, men who took responsibility, men who did the right thing and didn't try to see if some random god was going to take care of it for them. They prayed to the one true God, and all of the country we now have today is what came to be because of that.
Well, that's all I have.
All right.
Really?
It is.
I hope you guys enjoyed this first episode.
Sorry about the background
Yeah,
noise.
sorry about the background noise. It should be.
I'll
okay.
try to cut out as much as I can, but
Don't worry, we'll
So
figure this
first time
out as
doing
the
it
year
like
goes
this.
along.
As the
It
year
will
goes
get much better. We
Yeah.
promise.
Well, I hope you guys
Hopefully.
enjoyed that, and we'd love to hear any feedback you have, and maybe we can make this better for you. So yeah. Okay, let's do some donor shout-outs real fast. So Bryson, the first donor shout-out. People who have supported us on patreon.com/booknet. They've given more than $5 a month. They get a shout-out on the show. So I'm going to say their name. You guys are just going to, I don't know, say something
Echo.
else. Echo. Okay, Nana.
Nana.
Grandpappy and Wayla.
Grandpappy and
Isaiah's
Wayla.
grandparents, Mike and Sylvia.
Mike and
grandparents.
Sylvia.
Mike and Laura.
Mike and
Mike and
Laura.
Laura.
Anna.
Anna.
Emily.
Emily.
Becky.
Becky.
Lizzie.
Lizzie.
Keenan.
Keenan.
Why is it such a monitor?
All right, and now, as promised, Tanner, can do some whole new world.
A whole new world.
Don't you dare close your eyes.
Turn off.
Tanner's
sorry if it just got really loud. Tanner all of a sudden started talking really loud at this microphone.
Don't worry, guys. That's only for the solo.
All right, I hope you guys enjoyed that. We'll see you next time with Theogony Part 2. Until then.
Keep on booking it.